Welcome to my free writing course. My name's Mahsuda. Today I'm going to give you 3 tips for show, don't tell. Now this is one of the most common pieces of writing advice that you will have heard, yet it still seems to be a particular problem that a lot of writers stumble over. And one of the reasons is that we don't always have to show. Sometimes you do need to tell, but it's hard to know when to do this. So I'm hoping these 3 tips will really help you decide when to show and when to tell. My number 1 tip is to avoid explaining and info dumps. The thing is, when writers tell you things in fiction, it can end up feeling a bit like a lecture. And readers actually really like to figure things out for themselves. So if you're telling us how to feel about a certain character or telling us that this moment means this, you're kind of taking that experience away from your reader. Now, what's an info dump? When an author suddenly tells you in a few paragraphs everything you need to know about a certain world. This can happen a lot in fantasy when you're trying to introduce a world that isn't familiar to the reader. The problem is with info dumps, if you don't make them interesting and don't make them detailed, and if you don't show us the world, is that the reader will often feel like skipping that bit. And actually that's really important information, so you don't want your reader to skip that bit. So what can you do to keep your reader interested? You can weave that information into your narrative so it's not all in one paragraph, and also you can reveal it in different ways, either through body language or dialogue or description. So if you want to tell the reader that there's a new ruler in this kingdom that you've created, and she or he is a bit of a tyrant, instead of telling us that that ruler is a tyrant, you could have 2 characters having a conversation about something awful they've done. The more gruesome, the better. You could show the new ruler in a scene and look at all of the body language of the people around them and how they're reacting to that person. And also you could describe the new ruler. What is it about them that's so terrible and tyrannical? How can you show that in the way that they talk to people, in the way they present themselves, and in their actions? And here's where I've got a small exercise for you. So all I want you to do is to write the following sentence. I couldn't look at him. The sight of his smug face made me feel sick. Now that sentence is telling me 2 things. It's telling me that the other character is smug, and it's also telling the reader that the narrator feels sick by just looking at that person's face. So I want you to think about how you can change that sentence so that instead of telling me those things, you can show me. So maybe pause here and give yourself a couple of seconds to do that. So there's a number of ways you could have changed that sentence, but here's an example from me. I looked away from his grinning face, my stomach clenched. Now you can use that exercise whenever you feel like you're telling something in your writing. How can you show us that somebody is feeling something? How can you describe a situation? Can you use body language? Can you use dialogue? Can you use action? My number 2 tip is to create a puzzle for the reader. As I said in my first tip, readers don't really want to be told what's happening in a story. They want to figure things out for themselves. One of the most enjoyable things about reading is that you are creating a world in your head. So for example, if halfway through a novel you describe the main character as having purple hair, that's going to throw the reader because they've probably already created the image of what that main character looks like. Which actually leads to another little tip, which is if you're going to describe a character, describe them the first time you introduce them. And I'm going to use an example from my novel, How to Find Home. So this is the first time we're introduced to a character called Jules. She's a character that's full of life, but a bit erratic and also has a slight edge to her. Now I've told you what that character's like. I don't want to tell a reader that straight away. I want to give them a puzzle. So here's the description that I used in my novel. I walked on tiptoes to avoid the debris and then spotted Jules by the boarded up windows. She was jumping up and down with a can in one hand, her other hand slicing backwards and forwards to the beat. Her chestnut hair, usually pulled tight in a ponytail, had come loose on the sides. Ash fell down her camouflage jacket as she puffed away on a cigarette. She didn't seem bothered by it. That's the thing with Jules. When she's in the zone, she's not bothered by anything. What you might have noticed at the very end of that paragraph is I told you something about Jules. And we're going to talk about when it's okay to tell the reader something in my next tip. My tip number 3 is to use telling for a reason. So like I've said, you can tell the reader things. And sometimes you have to tell the reader things. Because if you literally showed me every nuance in your novel or short story, you would have epic, massive doorstepper novels. Sometimes you need to tell the reader something because you want to keep up the pace of the writing. Sometimes you need to tell the reader something because you're actually trying to deflect their attention from something that's really important. Or you're perhaps saying something that's the opposite of what is actually happening in the scene. So in How to Find Home, I start with 2 sentences that tell. This is a happy story. This is an adventure. The reason I decided to start with a tell is because if you've read the blurb on the back of the book, you'll know that the main character in this story is a homeless girl. And when we think of homelessness, we don't often think of happiness and adventure. So that was a deliberate contradiction to the reader's expectations. Hopefully that intrigues the reader and creates a puzzle for them as well. They want to know why this is a happy story. They want to know why it's an adventure. And from that point, I go on to describe a scene. Most of the things you do in writing has to be connected to a story. It has to be there for a reason. Also, sometimes you want to tell the reader something because you want to give them important information, but you don't want to spend 2 paragraphs telling them about it. It's going to slow down the pace. It's going to make us think that this particular piece of information is more important than it is. Sometimes you really just need to move on quickly. But what I would say is have a look at your writing and highlight how many times you've told the reader something. If it's only once or twice on a page, that's fine. If you find that it's a whole paragraph or it's riddled throughout your pages, then it's probably something that you can have a look at and try and address the balance of. Writing really is all about balance. This was part of my free writing course. If you'd like to see more of these videos, then you can subscribe to my channel. And if you'd like to support what I'm doing, then you can buy me a coffee on the Ko-fi link below. Thank you for joining me, and remember that every writing journey is different. So find the path that works for you.